Good evening from New York. I'm Lawrence O'Donnell. A new NBC Wall Street Journal poll shows that President Obama's job approval rating is tied at its lowest point, 45%, and more people believe the nation is on the wrong track than at any other point in his presidency. And yet, he still leads all prominent and generic Republican candidates in theoretical matchups in 2012. 42-39 against an unnamed Republican, 47-40 against Mitt Romney, 47-27 against John Thune, and 53-33 against Sarah Palin. Obama's ratings have held surprisingly steady over the past year and have been especially resilient with his core constituency of African Americans, Democrats, Latinos, and younger voters. Across the board, people seem to like the president personally, but are less likely to view him as a strong leader who is uniting the country and changing business as usual in Washington. So, has President Obama done the best he could given the limited powers of the presidency, the deadlocked Congress, and the conservative nature of the American people? Joining me now are Richard Wolff, author of Revival, The Struggle for Survival Inside the Obama White House, and Ari Berman, author of Herding Donkeys, The Fight to Rebuild the Democratic Party and Reshape American Politics. Ari Berman, are you surprised at these numbers given all the criticism the president's been getting from both left now and the right?
Yeah, not totally, Lawrence, and thanks for having me. I think if you look at the polling, his numbers have held steady for quite some time, and there are some glimmers of hope in that latest NBC News poll you just talked about. There's also some unsettling numbers out there that I'm sure we're going to talk about. As you know, no president since FDR has been elected or reelected even when unemployment rate was over 8%. As you mentioned, the right track, wrong track figures are very bad for him, 2-1 in another poll I saw, believing the country is on the wrong track. And then more broadly, I think he is losing some support from liberals in his coalition. He doesn't seem to be gaining support from independents as a result, if you look at this tax cut compromise. So I still think it's unclear how things are going to proceed going forward.
Richard Wolff, the tax cut compromise seems to be playing well in the polls. 59% overall approve of the tax cut compromise. 54% of Democrats supporting it. 60% of independents support it. And not surprisingly, 68% of Republicans support it, since it is a tax cut compromise. Is this about where the White House was hoping to be in striking this deal?
Yeah, it is. They're happy with that, but obviously they say, look, this was about the economy first and the economic needs, especially for the long-term unemployed, but also they're thinking strategically about where this places the president moving forward. So yes, the polls matter, but we're 2 years away from the president needing to worry that intently about the numbers here, but strategically it puts him in the middle. So when you have Democrats out there beating him up, you know, the more they beat him up, the better it is, because they're sending a signal, not just those Democrats, but the White House, that they have, in fact, gone to this central ground where hopefully those independent voters, at least from the White House's view, those independents will come home.
Now, Ari, Obama's support among Democrats has dropped from 82% last month to 76% now following the tax compromise deal. Do you read that as liberal support falling off, or some other possible sectors of Democratic Party support?
Well, Gallup actually looked at this, and they found that Obama was below support among liberal Democrats for the first time in his presidency, below 80%. And they looked at how support has fallen among Democrats more broadly since the tax cut compromise, and he's fallen more among liberal Democrats than he has among conservative Democrats. I think the polls you mentioned in terms of people supporting Democrats supporting this tax cut, I think they support it begrudgingly, and I think there's a lot of people that don't support it that enthusiastically, and I think there is this uneasy relationship between the president and his base, and I think that was heightened, the tension was heightened during this latest compromise.
Richard, I hate to use anecdotal information in the face of polls, but
go ahead.
I've been surprised at how much email and comment I've gotten from what I would consider mainstream Democrats, as well as liberal Democrats, complaining about this tax cut agreement. It seems that the Democratic Party rhetoric and the Obama rhetoric in particular on the tax cuts prior to the election really got traction with Obama supporters. I don't think the polls indicate that it got much useful political traction outside of Obama supporters, but Obama supporters definitely bought into the Obama theory of why the top tax bracket should go up. And their disappointment on this is really strong in any kind of one-on-one communication you get about it. And is there something that the White House needs to know inside these polls that these polls might not indicate in their aggregates?
Well, look, they know how uncomfortable this is and how much heat they're taking for it. Luckily for Democrats, they're going to have this whole same debate for the next 2 years because this whole thing is going to be played out all over again in the general election. So it's hardly a lost cause for people who feel passionately about it. And the president isn't stupid about the timing here. He knows he's going to be making exactly the same case again for the next election. The surprising thing here is that a plurality of Democrats, in fact, whatever it was, 50-something% of Democrats say this tax deal is the right thing to do. The interesting point, I feel, in my anecdotal thing, going over on a book tour, hearing from people in California, for instance, is I think Democrats are trying to figure out who they are. And when you were talking about a Bush-era thing or you're talking about foreign policy, it was kind of easy. This domestic economic argument is something that Clinton had to navigate, that Democrats now find much more difficult. Are they there to have a more fair justice, a more fair taxation system, or to help people at the bottom in this economy? And that's an identity question that Democrats have to figure out about themselves as well as this president.
Ari, as the clock ticks down on this lame duck session, what would a win on Don't Ask, Don't Tell do to those poll numbers in terms of Democratic support, liberal support for President Obama?
I think it'll make a big difference because I think it'll show that Democrats can accomplish something big, and it'll show that the White House is willing to fight for something big, and that's what's been missing, and that's what so many Democrats were upset about during the tax cut fight. It wasn't that Obama compromised. It looked like he compromised before he had even had the fight. And so I think if they can get some movement on START, if they can repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it'll show that Obama is serious about having a fight with Republicans, that he can bring some people in and that he can win a debate. Because we know the American people is with him on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Now the question is, does he have the political will? Do Democrats have the political will to actually capitalize on it?
Richard, I mentioned the limited powers of the presidency in my introduction to this discussion. I studied my high school textbook on government carefully, showing that real domestic governing power resides in the Congress. Then I went to work in the Senate, where I got to say, my experience of the presidency was that was the guy who would beg the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee or beg the chairman of the Finance Committee to do things, and other chairmen, and those chairmen would do them if it made sense to them or not. And I've never saw the presidency as a particularly powerful force in legislating the way they claim to be as candidates when they're running and they pretend there is no Congress. They say, elect me and the following thing will happen. When I listen to that, I never believe it, because I just think, tell me what the committees think. Tell me what the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee thinks. We having written your book, Inside This White House, Trying to Govern, what was the attitude of these people coming into this White House? Did they think that they had more legislative power than it turned out they had?
Well, they did do a lot legislatively, and I think part of their problem was, in fact, they handed over their messaging and their strategic positioning to those leaders in Congress, and it turned out that that was no way to go actually communicate with the outside world, tell people what their mission was. You couldn't talk about health care because maybe you'd be closing a door to a certain deal. How was the Recovery Act going to be structured? Who was controlling it? Those are important mission statements that people kind of judge what the president stands for. Ari was talking about the fight question, and I guess for Democrats that's one of the measures. But for other voters, they want to see, what's the purpose here? What was the Recovery Act trying to do? How was it trying to do it? And what they saw was this ugly, messy process, which may well be entirely what the Founding Fathers wanted, entirely what Washington operates like, but actually ends up being bad politics, especially when the other side, Mitch McConnell and his strategic geniuses over there, have a very clear message and a very clear mission. That's where these two things fall apart.
Richard Wolff and Ari Berman, thank you both for your time tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lawrence.